I am Hercule Poirot. Welcome to my new mystery story.
The December evening at Belmont House in Mayfair had been orchestrated with the precision that only vast wealth and impeccable breeding could achieve. Lady Vivian Belmont's annual winter soirée was the culmination of London's social season, an event where political influence mingled with artistic patronage and where fortunes could be made or destroyed over champagne and carefully chosen words. The Georgian mansion's grand rooms glowed with the warm light of hundreds of beeswax candles, their flames dancing in perfect harmony with the crystal chandeliers that had graced these halls for 3 generations. Among the distinguished guests that evening moved a carefully curated collection of London's most prominent figures. Mrs. Cordelia Ashford, the steel magnate's widow whose charitable foundations masked a ruthless business acumen, held court near the marble fireplace, her diamond tiara catching the candlelight with every animated gesture. Across the drawing room, Mr. Julian Hartwell, the celebrated portrait painter whose recent works had commanded unprecedented prices, stood in intense conversation with his patron, the eccentric collector Sir Montague Fairfax. The latter's obsession with acquiring rare artifacts was matched only by his reputation for driving hard bargains that left his business partners either wealthy or ruined. Dr. Evelyn Thornfield, recently returned from archaeological expeditions in Egypt, commanded attention with her tales of ancient treasures, while the Honourable Charles Pemberton, youngest son of the Earl of Westmoreland, lingered at the edges of conversations with the restless energy of a man whose gambling debts had become the subject of whispered speculation. Even the formidable Miss Constance Weatherby, Lady Belmont's sharp-tongued companion and secretary, moved through the gathering with her usual efficiency, ensuring that every detail of the evening proceeded flawlessly. The long gallery that connected the mansion's east and west wings had been transformed for the evening into a showcase of artistic splendor. Lady Belmont had commissioned the electric lights to be extinguished, relying instead upon an elaborate arrangement of silver candelabras that cast a warm, intimate glow upon the collection of Renaissance paintings that lined the paneled walls. The effect was breathtaking. Shadows danced across centuries-old masterpieces, and the Persian runner that stretched the length of the corridor seemed to glow with rich burgundy and gold. It was in this atmospheric passage that the evening's entertainment was to reach its crescendo. At precisely 10:30, Lady Belmont had arranged for the unveiling of her latest acquisition, a previously unknown Caravaggio that Dr. Thornfield had authenticated during her recent travels. The painting, valued at a sum that could purchase a country estate, was to be revealed to the assembled guests as the evening's final surprise. Miss Catherine Fairchild, Lady Belmont's young niece, who had been staying at Belmont House while recovering from a recent illness, was the first to sense that something had gone terribly wrong. She had slipped away from the crowded drawing room, seeking a moment of quiet contemplation before the evening's grand finale. The long gallery, with its soft candlelight and hushed atmosphere, had always been her favorite retreat within her aunt's imposing home. As she entered the corridor, Catherine immediately noticed the disturbance. 3 of the candelabras had been knocked askew, their flames guttering dangerously close to the ancient tapestries that adorned the walls. Pools of wax had hardened upon the polished floor, and the carefully arranged Persian runner lay rumpled and disturbed. But it was the figure slumped against the far wall that caused her breath to catch in her throat. Mr. Reginald Blackwood, Lady Belmont's trusted art dealer and the man responsible for acquiring the Caravaggio, lay motionless beneath one of the extinguished candelabras. His evening dress was immaculate save for a small, dark stain that had spread across his white waistcoat, a stain that gleamed wetly in the flickering candlelight. His face bore an expression of profound surprise, as if death had interrupted him in the middle of an important thought. Catherine's scream pierced the genteel murmur of conversation that had filled the mansion moments before. Within seconds, The long gallery was crowded with guests, their faces pale with shock as they took in the scene before them. Lady Belmont, her composure intact despite the horror, immediately took charge of the situation with the authority that had made her one of London's most formidable hostesses. "No one must touch anything," she commanded, her voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence. "Mr. Pemberton, please escort the ladies back to the drawing room. Dr. Thornfield, would you be so kind as to examine Mr. Blackwood?" As the archaeologist knelt beside the fallen man, her experienced hands quickly confirmed what everyone feared. "I'm afraid he's beyond help," she announced quietly. "The wound appears to be quite small but precisely placed. This was no accident." The revelation sent a ripple of shocked whispers through the assembled group. Mr. Hartwell, his artistic eye taking in the scene with professional detachment, observed aloud, "The arrangement of the candles. It's almost theatrical, wouldn't you say? As if someone wanted to create a particular effect." Sir Montague, his collector's instincts evident even in the face of tragedy, had noticed something else entirely. "The Caravaggio," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's gone." Indeed, the ornate easel that had been positioned at the corridor's center, draped with a silk covering in preparation for the evening's unveiling, now stood empty. The priceless painting had vanished as completely as if it had never existed. Lady Belmont's decision was swift and decisive. While others might have immediately summoned Scotland Yard, she possessed the wisdom to recognize that this crime required a more sophisticated approach. The theft of the Caravaggio, combined with the murder of the man who had authenticated it, suggested a complexity that would challenge even the finest investigative minds. "Jameson," she addressed her butler, who had appeared with his usual silent efficiency, "please telephone Mr. Hercule Poirot immediately. You will find his number in my private directory. Tell him that Lady Belmont requests his immediate assistance in a matter of the utmost urgency." As the butler withdrew to carry out his mistress's instructions, the guests found themselves trapped in a web of suspicion and fear. Among them walked a murderer, someone who had struck with deadly precision in the very heart of London's most exclusive society. The candlelit corridor, which had been designed to showcase beauty and culture, had instead become the stage for a crime that would test the limits of human cunning and deception. The flames of the remaining candles continued to flicker in the disturbed air, casting dancing shadows that seemed to mock the assembled company. In the distance, the sound of the telephone being lifted from its cradle signaled that help was on its way, help in the form of a small, fastidious Belgian gentleman whose reputation for unraveling the most complex mysteries was matched only by his unwavering faith in the power of psychological deduction. The game, as someone once said, was afoot. Jameson returned to the drawing room with his customary quiet efficiency, approaching Lady Belmont with the measured steps that had served the household for over 2 decades. His whispered report was brief but reassuring. Monsieur Poirot would arrive within the half-hour, having been dining at his club in nearby St. James's. The news rippled through the assembled guests with the subtle force of a stone dropped into still water, bringing both relief and a fresh wave of nervous anticipation. In the interim, Lady Belmont orchestrated the preservation of evidence with the same precision she applied to her legendary dinner parties. The long gallery was sealed but not locked, with footmen stationed at each entrance to ensure no disturbance of the scene. Jameson, ever methodical, had begun recording the movements and alibis of every person present, his careful notations revealing the first troubling inconsistencies that would later prove so significant. Dr. Thornfield, having completed her examination of the deceased, shared her professional observations in low, measured tones. The wound was precise and deadly, inflicted by someone with either medical knowledge or extraordinary luck. More disturbing still was the complete absence of defensive wounds or signs of struggle, suggesting that Mr. Blackwood had been taken entirely by surprise by someone he trusted implicitly. The guests confined to the drawing-room under the watchful supervision of the household staff began to display the strain of their circumstances. Sir Montague Fairfax sat hunched forward, his collector's mind fixated on the insurance implications of the theft. "The underwriters will claim negligence," he muttered to Mrs. Ashford, whose own business acumen made her a natural confidant in such matters. A painting of that value, displayed in candlelight with inadequate security measures. Mrs. Ashford's reply carried the acid precision of a woman accustomed to financial warfare. "Perhaps, Sir Montague, but only if the painting was actually here to be stolen. One might question whether it ever arrived at all." Her diamonds caught the light as she turned to observe Julian Hartwell, who had been sketching absent patterns on a napkin with the restless energy of an artist's mind at work. Miss Weatherby, Lady Belmont's sharp-eyed companion, interjected with characteristic efficiency. "I witnessed Mr. Blackwood supervising the delivery personally at 8:30. The crate was brought through the service entrance and into the small salon adjoining the gallery, where Dr. Thornfield examined the authentication seals." "I examined only the exterior seals," Dr. Thornfield corrected with scholarly precision. The humidity and lighting conditions were unsuitable for uncrating such a delicate work. Mr. Blackwood assured me the unveiling would occur only at the appointed time, under controlled circumstances. Young Charles Pemberton, whose gambling debts had become the subject of increasingly urgent whispers, attempted to lighten the oppressive atmosphere with forced joviality. "Rather like a magic trick, isn't it? Now you see it, now you don't. One hears stories of paintings spirited away under the very noses of their owners." Catherine Fairchild, still pale from her shocking discovery, found her voice with surprising steadiness. It needn't be magic at all. The gallery was quite dim, with shadows everywhere. Someone familiar with the house could easily have wrapped the painting in its own covering cloth and carried it away as if transporting any ordinary bundle. She paused, remembering a detail that had puzzled her. There was also a peculiar smell in the corridor, like spent matches or perhaps sulphur. This observation drew sharp attention from the assembled company, though none could immediately explain its significance. Jameson, continuing his methodical documentation, noted the contradiction between Mr. Hartwell's claim of being near the pianoforte at 10:20 and Lady Arbuthnot's gentle correction that he had been discussing varnish techniques with Sir Montague in the library. Similar discrepancies emerged as alibis were compared and found wanting. A housemaid, summoned by Jameson for questioning, provided another crucial piece of information. She had observed someone descending the service staircase at 10:15, moving purposefully toward the long gallery. The dim lighting had prevented her from identifying the individual, but the timing placed this mysterious figure at the scene mere minutes before the crime's discovery. The sound of a motor car drawing up to the front entrance brought a momentary hush to the proceedings. Through the tall windows, the guests could see the distinctive silhouette of a small, precise figure emerging from the vehicle, his movements deliberate and unhurried despite the urgency of the summons. Hercule Poirot had arrived, and with him came the promise that the tangled web of deception surrounding the night's events would soon be methodically unraveled by one of the finest investigative minds in all of Europe. Hercule Poirot entered Belmont House with the measured precision that had become his trademark, pausing in the marble foyer to remove his overcoat and gloves with deliberate care. Jameson received these items with the respectful attention due to a man whose reputation preceded him like an invisible force. The detective's egg-shaped head turned slowly as he surveyed the grand staircase and ancestral portraits, his green eyes cataloguing every detail of the aristocratic setting with the methodical attention of a man who understood that truth often lay hidden in the smallest particulars. Lady Belmont approached with the measured grace of a woman accustomed to command, yet even she seemed diminished by the detective's presence. The assembled guests in the drawing-room fell silent as Poirot was escorted into their midst, his appearance exactly matching the newspaper descriptions. immaculately groomed, with a waxed moustache that caught the light and a bearing that suggested absolute confidence in his intellectual capabilities. "Madame," Poirot addressed Lady Belmont with a formal bow, his accent carrying the precise cadence of careful English overlaying his native French. "I'm at your service, but first we will examine the scene, yes? The stage must be observed before the actors have had too much time to rehearse their parts." His request was delivered with polite firmness that brooked no argument, and Lady Belmont immediately arranged for him to be escorted to the long gallery, accompanied only by herself, Jameson, and Dr. Thornfield. The long gallery presented itself to Poirot's scrutiny like a manuscript written in shadows and candlelight. He paused on the threshold, his gaze sweeping methodically from floor to ceiling, absorbing every nuance of the disturbed scene. "We will keep the mind like a mirror," he murmured to Lady Belmont, reflecting all, judging nothing until we have seen everything. His approach to the crime scene was that of a choreographer studying a complex dance, noting not just individual elements, but their relationships to one another. Moving through the space with surprising agility, Poirot knelt beside the spot where Blackwood's body had been discovered, producing a small magnifying glass from his waistcoat pocket. He examined the polished floor with minute attention, noting the pattern of wax drippings and the subtle scuff marks that spoke of nervous movement. "Observe, madame," he said, indicating a particular area several feet from where the body had lain. "Someone has stood here, shifting weight from foot to foot. The mark is fresh, made this evening by someone in a state of considerable agitation." His attention turned to the 3 disturbed candelabras, their positions studied with the intensity of a geometrician solving a complex equation. "These were not knocked over in struggle," he announced with quiet certainty, "but arranged deliberately to create shadow in specific areas. Our criminal understands the importance of lighting in concealing activities." He moved to the empty easel, examining its construction with professional interest. "The painting, Jameson. It was secured. How?" "With silk cords, Monsieur Poirot," the butler replied with his customary precision. "Mr. Blackwood was most particular about preventing damage to the canvas or frame. The cords were attached to the frame corners and tied to the easel supports." Poirot examined the easel supports, finding the silk cords cut cleanly rather than untied. "Ah, but here we have efficiency rather than care. Someone who wished to work quickly, without concern for the delicate nature of such valuable artwork. This suggests either remarkable confidence or desperate improvisation." He straightened, brushing an invisible speck from his immaculate jacket, his expression thoughtful. The detective paused at the spot where Catherine Fairchild had detected the unusual odor, inhaling deeply through his prominent nose. Indeed, there lingers still a trace of something chemical. Not matches, I think, but perhaps a photographic compound or similar substance. Most interesting. He turned to Dr. Thornfield with a questioning look. "The wound, doctor. You observed it closely?" "A single, precise puncture beneath the left ribs," she confirmed, "clean and deadly, suggesting either medical knowledge or extraordinary accuracy. No defensive wounds, no signs of struggle. Mr. Blackwood was taken completely by surprise by someone he trusted." "Precisely so," Poirot nodded, his satisfaction evident. Death came as a message delivered at close quarters, from someone whose presence aroused no suspicion. He moved along the gallery, examining the paintings that lined the walls, each illuminated by its own arrangement of candles. The murderer chose this location with great care. Multiple exits, dramatic lighting, shadows that could conceal movement, yet also the most public space in the house, suggesting either remarkable boldness or circumstances that allowed no alternative. Returning to the drawing room, Poirot requested that Catherine Fairchild join them privately for a more detailed account of her discovery. The young woman, still pale but composed, repeated her story with admirable precision, adding details that had not emerged in the initial shock. "The silence was complete," she explained, "which struck me as odd, because one usually hears the whisper of candle flames, and the smell was definitely chemical, like something had burned out rather than simply been extinguished. "Excellent, mademoiselle," Poirot said warmly. "Your powers of observation are most commendable. Now, this figure you glimpsed in the shadows before you discovered the body, can you describe anything more about their movement or bearing?" Catherine hesitated, then shook her head. "I'm afraid not, Monsieur Poirot. The lighting was so uneven, and I was focused on the disturbed candles. It was more an impression of movement than an actual sighting." Jameson, who had been quietly taking notes throughout the examination, provided additional information from the housemaid's testimony. "The girl observed someone on the service stairs at 10:15, monsieur. Moving quickly but not running, carrying what appeared to be a roll of cloth or similar bundle. She was certain the footsteps were soft, neither ladies' heels nor gentlemen's patent leather." Poirot's eyebrows rose slightly at this intelligence. "Soft shoes, you say? Most illuminating. Someone prepared for silent movement, or perhaps someone whose usual footwear would not betray their presence." He turned to Lady Belmont with renewed purpose. "Now, madame, we shall begin the systematic examination of alibis and motives. Each person present this evening will tell me their story, and we shall see what patterns emerge from the contradictions." As they prepared to return to the assembled guests, Poirot paused once more at the gallery entrance, his sharp eyes taking in details that others had missed. The investigation was beginning to reveal its deeper patterns, and the little grey cells were already working to arrange the scattered pieces of evidence into a coherent picture of deception and murder. The psychological game was about to begin in earnest. Poirot requested the use of Lady Belmont's morning room for his interviews, a smaller, more intimate space that would encourage confidence while allowing him to observe each suspect's reactions without the distraction of the larger gathering. The room's tall windows overlooked the frost-covered square, and its warm lamplight created an atmosphere more conducive to revelation than interrogation. Lady Belmont arranged for tea to be served, understanding that the detective's methods often relied as much on psychological comfort as on direct questioning. Lady Belmont herself was the first to be interviewed, settling into the wing-back chair opposite Poirot with the composed dignity that had made her one of London's most formidable hostesses. Her account of the evening was precise and methodical, yet Poirot detected subtle signs of distress beneath her controlled exterior. When he inquired about her relationship with the deceased, her composure wavered almost imperceptibly. Reginald was more than merely an art dealer, Monsieur Poirot, she admitted, her fingers absently adjusting the pearls at her throat. He had been advising our family on acquisitions for nearly 15 years. His expertise was beyond question, his integrity absolute. She paused, then added with reluctance. However, he had seemed unusually agitated this afternoon. He received an urgent telephone call at approximately 3 o'clock that left him quite disturbed. He requested the use of my private study and spent considerable time examining papers from his briefcase. This revelation prompted Poirot to request a brief examination of the small salon where the Caravaggio's crate had been stored. Accompanied by Jameson and Miss Weatherby, who produced the key from her efficient chain, Poirot discovered evidence that would prove crucial to his investigation. The shipping crate, which should have contained a painting worth a small fortune, moved with suspicious lightness when he tested its weight. More significantly, the sealing wax, while appearing intact, showed hairline cracks, suggesting careful tampering and resealing. "Observe, mes amis," Poirot murmured, producing his magnifying glass to examine a nearly invisible strand of black silk caught on a splinter of the crate. "The covering cloth that should drape our mysterious painting has left its signature. Yet where is this cloth now?" Miss Weatherby confirmed with growing unease that the black silk velvet drape, specifically chosen for the evening's unveiling, could not be located anywhere in the house. Returning to the morning room, Poirot continued his systematic interviews. Julian Hartwell entered with the restless energy of an artist's temperament, his soft velvet house slippers making no sound on the polished floor. His explanation for the footwear was plausible enough. Yet Poirot noted the faint stains on his cuffs and the way his fingers moved constantly, as if sketching invisible patterns in the air. "You were discussing art techniques with Sir Montague in the library," Poirot observed, consulting his notes. "Yet earlier you mentioned being near the pianoforte at 10:20. Perhaps you could clarify this apparent discrepancy?" The question was delivered with such gentle courtesy that Hartwell's initial confidence faltered slightly. "The timing may have been confused in the excitement," Hartwell replied, though his artistic eye had sharpened with attention. "One moves freely at such gatherings, engaging in multiple conversations throughout the evening." His recovery was smooth, yet not quite smooth enough to escape Poirot's notice. Mrs. Ashford's testimony proved particularly illuminating, her business acumen making her naturally observant of inconsistencies in others' accounts. She had observed Hartwell near the refreshment table at 10:15, engaged in conversation with Dr. Thornfield about archaeological authentication processes. More intriguingly, she mentioned witnessing a heated exchange between Blackwood and young Pemberton earlier in the evening regarding a painting's authenticity. Dr. Thornfield corroborated Mrs. Ashford's timeline while adding her own professional observations about Blackwood's demeanor. "He seemed genuinely excited about the evening's presentation," she noted. "Yet there was an underlying nervousness, as if he feared some complication might arise. He mentioned receiving unexpected correspondence that had required him to adjust his plans." Charles Pemberton's interview revealed the desperate charm of a man whose gambling debts had become increasingly pressing. His alibi was vague, relying on fleeting encounters and casual conversations that others could not precisely corroborate. Most tellingly, his dancing shoes were thin-soled and silent, exactly the type of footwear that would allow for undetected movement through the house. As the interviews concluded, Poirot found himself with a complex web of contradictory alibis, hidden motives, and physical evidence that painted a picture of careful premeditation. The light crate, the missing drape, the mysterious telephone call, and the soft-soled shoes all pointed toward a crime planned with meticulous attention to detail. Yet questions remained about the precise sequence of events and the true identity of the person who had moved so silently through the candlelit corridor. "The truth begins to emerge," Poirot announced to Jameson as they prepared to rejoin the assembled company, "like a photograph developing in the dark room. Soon we shall see the complete picture with perfect clarity." The sound of another motor car arriving at Belmont House announced the inevitable involvement of Scotland Yard, though Poirot had hoped for more time to conduct his preliminary investigation without official interference. Inspector Japp entered with his characteristic blend of professional efficiency and barely concealed skepticism toward what he privately considered Poirot's overly elaborate methods. The two men had worked together often enough for mutual respect to temper their philosophical differences about investigative technique. "Evening, Poirot," Japp said, removing his hat and surveying the assembled company with the practiced eye of a man who had seen guilt wear many faces. "Lady Belmont's butler was quite right to telephone the Yard, though I understand you've already begun your examination. What have we got then?" Poirot provided a concise summary of his observations, emphasizing the tampered crate, the missing velvet drape, and the chemical odor that Catherine Fairchild had detected. Japp listened with the attention of a professional, though his expression suggested he found the emphasis on psychological deduction somewhat impractical when physical evidence might provide more straightforward answers. Under Japp's direction, a systematic search of the service areas commenced, with particular attention to locations where stolen artwork might be concealed or evidence disposed of. The search proved remarkably fruitful when a footman discovered the missing black velvet drape in the boot room, carefully rolled and hidden behind a row of polished riding boots. The fabric bore telltale signs of recent use, tiny flakes of what appeared to be paint, several strands of pale hair caught in the nap, and a distinctive gray smudge that gave off the unmistakable scent of photographic chemicals. "Our missing curtain," Japp announced with satisfaction, examining the evidence with professional thoroughness. And it's been used for more than just covering paintings, I'd say. These paint flakes and the chemical residue suggest someone's been doing more than simple art appreciation this evening. The discovery prompted immediate attention to Julian Hartwell, whose artistic materials and soft-soled shoes made him an obvious suspect. When questioned about his handling of the drape earlier in the evening, Hartwell's composure showed the first signs of strain, though he maintained his innocence with the dignity of a man accustomed to defending his artistic integrity. "I examined the drape only to advise on its proper arrangement for the unveiling," he insisted, though his fingers moved nervously as if sketching invisible patterns in the air. "Any residue you've found could have been transferred from my studio clothes or materials." Poirot observed these proceedings with the detached interest of a man whose mind was working on multiple levels simultaneously. While Japp focused on the physical evidence, the Belgian detective was more intrigued by the psychological patterns emerging from the group dynamics. The assembled guests were displaying a natural human tendency to seek the most convenient explanation for the evening's horrors, and Hartwell's artistic background made him an appealingly obvious candidate for both the theft and the murder. Yet something in the arrangement of evidence troubled Poirot's methodical mind. The discovery of the drape, while certainly significant, felt almost too convenient, too perfectly placed to incriminate the most obvious suspect. His experience had taught him that genuine criminals rarely left such clear trails, while those seeking to create false evidence often overplayed their hand in precisely this manner. The chemical odor that Mademoiselle Catherine detected, Poirot mused aloud. It suggests photographic work, does it not? Perhaps someone wished to create documentation of the painting before its theft, or possibly to prepare evidence that would support a particular narrative about the evening's events. Dr. Thornfield, who had been observing the proceedings with scholarly detachment, suddenly appeared more alert. "Photographic reproduction of artwork is a specialized skill, Monsieur Poirot. It requires not only the proper chemicals, but also considerable expertise in lighting and exposure. Not everyone present would possess such knowledge." This observation prompted Poirot to consider the possibility that the crime involved not just theft and murder, but a more sophisticated deception designed to manipulate the investigation itself. The missing painting, the conveniently discovered evidence, and the chemical residue all suggested a level of premeditation that went beyond simple desperation. As the evening wore toward dawn, a consensus began to form among the guests and even Inspector Japp that the case was approaching resolution. The physical evidence seemed to point clearly toward artistic expertise and opportunity, while the psychological pressure of the investigation was beginning to show its effects on the most obvious suspects. Yet Poirot remained troubled by the very neatness of the solution, his little gray cells detecting patterns that suggested a more complex truth lay hidden beneath the surface of apparent guilt. "Mon ami," he said quietly to Japp as they prepared to continue their investigation, "we must be very careful not to mistake the shadow for the substance. Someone has gone to considerable trouble to arrange this particular tableau, and I suspect we have not yet seen the final act of their performance." The morning light filtering through the tall windows of Belmont House promised to illuminate more than just the winter landscape, as Poirot prepared to delve deeper into the psychological complexities that he sensed lay at the heart of this carefully orchestrated deception. The morning light filtering through the tall windows of Belmont House cast the long gallery in an entirely different aspect than the dramatic candlelight of the previous evening. Poirot requested this renewed examination with the methodical precision that characterized his approach, understanding that daylight often revealed what shadows had concealed. What he discovered there challenged every assumption the investigation had thus far accepted, confirming his growing suspicion that they were dealing with a carefully orchestrated deception rather than a crime of opportunity. Under natural illumination, the Persian runner showed not the random disturbance of genuine struggle, but a deliberate pattern that spoke of theatrical staging. The wax drippings from the disturbed candelabras, which had appeared chaotic in flickering light, now revealed an almost geometric arrangement that suggested someone with artistic training had positioned them with deliberate precision. More significantly, embedded within the largest pool of hardened wax, Poirot discovered tiny fragments of canvas fiber, evidence that the painting had indeed passed this way, but not in the manner they had been led to believe. Inspector Japp, meanwhile, was consolidating what appeared to be a compelling case against Julian Hartwell. The artist's vague alibis, his admitted presence near the gallery, and his professional familiarity with both art materials and photographic processes created a narrative that satisfied the inspector's preference for straightforward solutions. A more rigorous search of Hartwell's belongings had yielded a pointed engraving tool with suspicious stains, a container of magnesium powder used in photographic work, and most damning of all, a narrow-bladed folding knife bearing what appeared to be traces of blood. "The evidence speaks for itself, Poirot," Japp declared with satisfaction, displaying the incriminating items. "Hartwell had means, opportunity, and motive. His soft-soled shoes would have allowed silent movement. His artistic knowledge explains the staged scene, and his financial difficulties provide ample reason for theft." Yet Poirot remained quietly unconvinced, his sharp eyes detecting the genuine distress in Hartwell's reactions, a distress that seemed more akin to indignation at false accusation than the cunning of a cornered killer. The Belgian detective had seen too many elaborate deceptions to accept the first and most obvious answer, particularly when that answer arrived wrapped in such convenient packaging. His skepticism deepened when he examined the recovered velvet drape more closely. Among the paint flakes and chemical residue, he discovered several strands of very fine, light-colored hair, a detail that contradicted Japp's theory in a subtle but significant way. Hartwell's hair was distinctly dark brown, making these pale strands evidence of someone else's involvement in the crime. More intriguingly, the chemical residue on the drape was not the developing fluid or fixer that one might expect from general photographic work, but rather the distinctive signature of flash powder, commonly used in studio portraiture when natural light proved insufficient. The concentration suggested recent ignition in close proximity to the fabric, pointing toward a deliberate action rather than accidental transfer. Catherine Fairchild, when questioned again about her discovery of the crime scene, provided a crucial detail that had been overlooked in the initial shock. "There was a faint hiss," she recalled with growing certainty, "almost inaudible, just before I saw Mr. Blackwood, and the silence was so complete, as if the corridor itself held its breath for that moment." This revelation resonated deeply with Poirot's understanding of the crime's true nature. A hiss, coupled with the smell of flash powder, suggested not the clumsy actions of a desperate thief, but the precise execution of a calculated plan. Someone had used a controlled, rapid method to create sudden darkness, perhaps for just an instant, to facilitate their deadly work. Miss Weatherby, whose efficient nature made her an invaluable witness, provided additional timeline information that further complicated the emerging picture. Mr. Blackwood was most particular about examining the crate one final time, she recalled with characteristic precision. He requested the salon be locked at 9 o'clock, yet insisted on one more inspection at 9:15. I accompanied him with the key, and he seemed unusually agitated about the security arrangements. A subsequent examination of Lady Belmont's private study revealed evidence that someone had been conducting correspondence under considerable stress. The blotter bore impressions that, when revealed through Poirot's careful pencil shading, disclosed fragments of a telegram message: "Unveiling precarious stop substitution, arranged stop delivery, midnight side entrance." The implications were staggering, suggesting not spontaneous crime but elaborate premeditation involving multiple parties. The torn corner of a telegram envelope in the wastebasket, along with a curl of black sealing wax bearing a reddish speck, provided additional evidence of urgent communications that had preceded the evening's events. Yet when Jameson confirmed that no parcels had arrived after 10 o'clock, the promised midnight delivery remained mysteriously absent, creating another contradiction in an increasingly complex web of deception. As the morning progressed, Poirot observed the assembled company with the penetrating gaze of a man whose little grey cells were working to arrange scattered pieces of evidence into a coherent pattern. The careful staging of the crime scene, the systematic planting of evidence against the most obvious suspect, and the precise timing of events all suggested a conspiracy involving multiple participants, each playing a carefully rehearsed role in an elaborate performance designed to misdirect the investigation. The truth begins to emerge, like a photograph in the developing solution, Poirot murmured to himself, unconsciously echoing the chemical processes that seemed central to the mystery. While Inspector Japp prepared to arrest Hartwell based on the accumulating physical evidence, the Belgian detective sensed that they were dealing with something far more sophisticated than simple theft and murder. Someone among the assembled company possessed knowledge that could illuminate the entire affair, yet was maintaining silence either from fear or complicity. The stage was set for a more intricate psychological confrontation, one that would require all of Poirot's considerable skills to separate truth from the elaborate deception that had been so carefully constructed around it. Inspector Japp's patience had reached its natural conclusion, and he moved toward Julian Hartwell with the decisive authority of a man who believed the evidence spoke clearly enough to warrant immediate action. The artist stood with quiet dignity, his soft-soled shoes and artistic materials having painted him as the obvious culprit in a crime that seemed to follow the most logical of patterns. Yet Poirot raised a gentle but firm hand, his green eyes holding an intensity that gave even the practical inspector pause. 1 hour only, mon ami, Poirot requested with the quiet authority that had resolved so many seemingly impossible cases. 60 minutes, and if I cannot demonstrate that this evidence has been arranged with deliberate precision to mislead us, then I shall not oppose your course of action. The Belgian detective's confidence was not the bluster of desperation, but the calm certainty of a man whose little grey cells had detected patterns that others had missed. Japp hesitated, his professional instincts wrestling with his grudging respect for Poirot's uncanny ability to uncover truth where others saw only surface appearances. Very well, he conceded with visible reluctance, but Hartwell stays under close supervision, and you share everything you discover. At that precise moment, as if summoned by the dramatic tension of the scene, Miss Weatherby's voice carried from Lady Belmont's private study with a note of profound shock that cut through the morning air like a blade. Her cry was not one of fear, but of the kind of outraged astonishment that comes from discovering a truth so fundamental that it reshapes everything previously understood. Poirot, whose senses were perpetually attuned to the subtlest variations in human emotion, moved toward the sound with surprising swiftness, followed by the entire company. They discovered Miss Weatherby standing over Mr. Blackwood's leather briefcase, her usually impeccable composure shattered as she held a small, leather-bound journal with trembling fingers. "This cannot be possible," she declared, her voice carrying the weight of a revelation that threatened to overturn everything they had assumed about the evening's events. "Mr. Blackwood's private notes. They speak of deception on a scale I can hardly comprehend." Poirot accepted the journal with gentle reverence, his sharp eyes scanning the elegant script that revealed Blackwood's growing desperation over the past several days. The entries detailed his horrifying discovery that the Caravaggio, which he had personally authenticated and arranged for Lady Belmont's collection, was in fact a sophisticated forgery of breathtaking skill. The art dealer had been contacted by an anonymous source who provided evidence that the painting was a modern reproduction, executed with such masterful technique that it had fooled even his experienced eye during the initial examination. The implication struck the assembled company like a physical blow. Lady Belmont's face drained of color as she grasped the magnitude of the deception, while Dr. Thornfield's scholarly composure cracked under the weight of professional embarrassment. The mysterious telegram fragments now revealed their true meaning. Blackwood had been desperately attempting to acquire the genuine Caravaggio through clandestine channels, hoping to replace the forgery before the evening's unveiling could expose the fraud and destroy both his reputation and Lady Belmont's standing in London society. But this changes everything, Inspector Japp observed, with the dawning realization of a man whose entire understanding of the case had been fundamentally altered. If the painting was already a fake, then we're not dealing with theft at all, but with murder to conceal fraud. Poirot nodded with satisfaction, his methodical mind already rearranging the evidence into new patterns that made far more sense than the obvious narrative they had been following. Precisely so, Inspector. Mr. Blackwood was not killed because he possessed something valuable, but because he knew something dangerous. The murderer struck not to facilitate theft, but to ensure silence. To demonstrate his developing theory, Poirot requested that the long gallery be restored to its exact condition from the previous evening, with candelabras positioned precisely as they had been found. From the evidence collected earlier, he produced the small container of magnesium powder discovered among the suspicious materials, handling it with the delicate precision of a man who understood its significance. "Observe carefully," he announced to the assembled company, measuring a small quantity of the powder onto a metal tray that Jameson provided. Mademoiselle Catherine spoke of a hiss and a chemical odor. Let us see what such substances can accomplish. With a lit taper, he ignited the powder, producing an instantaneous flash of brilliant white light that temporarily overwhelmed the candle's gentler illumination. For a crucial moment, the corridor was filled with blinding radiance, followed by a heartbeat of comparative darkness as everyone's vision struggled to readjust. The demonstration revealed the true sophistication of the crime. In that brief moment of visual confusion, a skilled individual could have moved with deadly precision, striking before their victim could react or even clearly see their attacker. The chemical residue that settled from the flash matched exactly the gray smudge found on the velvet drape, confirming that this technique had been employed during the actual murder. More significantly, Poirot's keen observation of the assembled company during the demonstration revealed telling reactions. While most flinched naturally at the sudden brightness, certain individuals displayed knowledge of what to expect. A hand raised protectively over specific areas of vision, a subtle backward step that suggested familiarity with the flash's effective range, a casual gesture that seemed designed to brush away expected residue. "The canvas fragments embedded in the wax," Poirot continued, his voice carrying the quiet authority of absolute certainty. "They are not from a stolen masterpiece, but from the forgery itself. Our murderer was not removing valuable artwork, but destroying evidence of the deception that Mr. Blackwood had discovered. The painting never left this house because there was no genuine painting to steal." The revelation transformed the entire investigation from a case of art theft and murder into something far more sinister, a conspiracy to conceal fraud through violence. The careful staging of evidence against Julian Hartwell, the convenient discovery of incriminating materials, and the elaborate misdirection all served to protect someone whose reputation and fortune depended upon the forgery remaining undetected. Sir Montague Fairfax, whose collector's obsession had made him an early suspect, now appeared in an entirely different light. His detailed knowledge of the Caravaggio's supposed provenance, his nervous energy when questioned, and his presence near the service areas during the critical period all suggested involvement in a scheme far more complex than simple theft. As the morning sun climbed higher above Belmont House, Poirot found himself with the essential elements of a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of London's art world. The psychological game was entering its most critical phase as the detective prepared to confront not just a murderer, but the architect of an elaborate fraud whose exposure would send shockwaves through the entire cultural establishment. The truth, as always, lay hidden beneath layers of deception, waiting for the precise application of logic and human understanding to bring it into the light. The psychological impact of Poirot's demonstration rippled through the assembled company like stones cast into still water, each reaction revealing more than words could convey. The detective observed with satisfaction how certain individuals had displayed unconscious knowledge of the flash's effects, their protective gestures and calculated positioning, speaking volumes about their familiarity with photographic processes. Yet it was the discovery that followed which would provide the most damning evidence of the evening's true nature. A commotion from the service areas drew their attention as a footman appeared, his face pale with the urgency of his message. The house's furnace had begun producing unusual smoke, and upon investigation, the stoker had discovered remnants that bore no resemblance to ordinary coal or household refuse. Poirot requested immediate examination of the furnace room, understanding that desperate criminals often sought the most complete methods of destroying evidence. The descent to the service level revealed a scene that confirmed the detective's developing theory with startling clarity. Among the clinker and ash lay the unmistakable remnants of artistic materials, warped sections of stretcher keys, the small triangular wedges used to tighten canvas in modern frames, and curled flakes of what had once been primed canvas. Poirot knelt beside the furnace mouth, producing his magnifying glass to examine a partially burned fragment where white ground had vitrified rather than burning cleanly. The distinctive odor of linseed oil combined with modern whitening agents, he announced to the assembled group, his voice carrying the quiet satisfaction of confirmed deduction. And observe these stretcher keys, mes amis. The triangular construction and machine-cut precision speak of contemporary craftsmanship, not the hand-forged hardware one would expect from a genuine 17th-century masterpiece. Inspector Japp's practical mind immediately grasped the implications. So the forgery was destroyed here, in the most complete manner available. Whoever did this knew their way to the furnace and understood the household routines well enough to work unobserved. Dr. Thornfield, whose scholarly composure had shown increasing strain throughout the investigation, stepped forward to examine the evidence with professional interest. Yet Poirot noted how her hands trembled slightly as she handled the charred fragments, and how her usual academic confidence seemed forced when she spoke. "The destruction is indeed thorough," she observed, "though traces of the deception remain for those who know what to seek." The detective's attention was drawn to a small fragment where the ground layer met a darker glaze, within which a whisper of black thread persisted, fused and brittle from the intense heat. "A cousin to our velvet drape," he murmured, indicating the charred material. The covering that concealed the false masterpiece during its final journey to destruction. Returning to the drawing room, Poirot requested that Lady Belmont provide the insurance documentation for the Caravaggio, understanding that financial motivations often lay at the heart of such elaborate deceptions. Miss Weatherby retrieved the locked folio with her characteristic efficiency, laying out documents that revealed a provisional coverage schedule of remarkable precision. The insurance was to commence at precisely 10:30, contingent upon public presentation, with theft coverage extending for 24 hours at a valuation that far exceeded the painting's purchase price. Observe the elegant timing. Poirot addressed the assembled company, his finger resting on the recent endorsement. The unveiling would establish the painting's authenticity and value, while immediate theft would convert suspicion into substantial compensation, but only if no whisper of forgery could reach the insurer's ears. Mrs. Cordelia Ashford, whose business acumen had made her naturally observant of financial irregularities, maintained her composed expression, yet Poirot detected a subtle tightening around her eyes that spoke of deeper involvement than mere spectatorship. Her earlier comments about underwriters and negligence now took on a more sinister significance, suggesting foreknowledge of the insurance arrangements and their implications. The systematic analysis of physical evidence revealed additional crucial details. The light-colored hair found on the velvet drape, when compared against all present, pointed toward specific individuals whose coloring matched the forensic evidence. The chemical residue proved to be not ordinary photographic developer, but the distinctive signature of flash powder, requiring specialized knowledge of studio portraiture techniques that few possessed. The expertise required for this deception, Poirot explained with growing certainty, encompasses not merely artistic skill, but intimate knowledge of authentications processes, insurance procedures, and photographic techniques. We seek someone whose background provides access to all these specialized areas of knowledge. Dr. Thornfield's archaeological career had indeed required extensive photographic documentation in remote locations where traditional lighting proved inadequate, making flash powder a familiar tool. Her professional relationships with collectors and dealers provided the connections necessary for commissioning sophisticated forgeries. Most significantly, her scholarly reputation would lend credibility to any authentication process, making her an invaluable asset to those planning elaborate fraud. The telegram fragments discovered in Lady Belmont's study now revealed their full significance. The message about substitution arranged and delivery midnight side entrance spoke not of theft, but of a desperate attempt to replace the exposed forgery with a genuine work before the deception could be revealed. Blackwood's murder had been necessary to prevent his threatened exposure of the fraud during the evening's unveiling. As the morning light strengthened, illuminating the drawing room where London's social elite found themselves trapped in a web of suspicion and deceit, Poirot prepared for the psychological confrontation that would expose the full truth. The evidence had been methodically assembled, the motives clearly established, and the method of murder definitively proven. Yet the final revelation required not just logical deduction, but the precise application of psychological pressure that would force the guilty party to abandon their carefully constructed facade. The little grey cells had arranged all the pieces of the puzzle with characteristic precision, and the stage was set for the dramatic denouement that would bring justice to the corpse in the candlelit corridor. The psychological tension in the drawing room had reached a delicate equilibrium, with each guest maintaining their composure while privately calculating their exposure to suspicion. Poirot understood that this was the crucial moment when careful pressure could fracture even the most carefully constructed facades, revealing the truth that lay beneath layers of deception and misdirection. With characteristic precision, the detective requested that each person present submit to a brief examination of their hands and clothing, explaining with courteous authority that magnesium powder left distinctive traces that could either eliminate suspects or confirm involvement. The request was delivered with such professional courtesy that no one could reasonably object, though several faces betrayed the strain of this methodical scrutiny. Sir Montague extended his collector's hands with aristocratic dignity, the skin dry and unmarked by any chemical residue. Mrs. Ashford offered her elegant fingers with business-like efficiency, her diamond rings catching the morning light as Jameson conducted his discreet inspection. Julian Hartwell's hands bore the honest stains of his artistic profession, yet showed no evidence of the burns that flash powder would inflict upon unprotected skin. Dr. Thornfield submitted to the examination with scholarly composure, though Poirot's trained eye detected a subtle tremor in her usually steady hands. Between the thumb and forefinger of her right hand, almost invisible unless the light struck it precisely, was a faint crescent of reddening that spoke of recent contact with intense heat. When questioned, she explained with academic precision that an alcohol lamp in the small salon had flared unexpectedly while she examined authentication labels earlier in the evening. Miss Weatherby's capable hands were immaculate, though the cuffs of her practical blouse bore the faintest grey smear where fabric had brushed against metal surfaces. Catherine Fairchild's pale hands trembled as she offered them for inspection, bearing no trace of chemical residue but showing the natural distress of a young woman who had witnessed violent death. Charles Pemberton presented his hands with boyish bravado, a tiny fleck of ash clinging near his cuff, which he dismissed with nervous laughter as the inevitable consequence of an evening spent near the drawing-room fireplace. The systematic examination revealed patterns that spoke more clearly than words, yet Poirot sensed that the most significant revelations lay not in what the evidence showed, but in how each individual reacted to its discovery. He observed with particular interest how Dr. Thornfield positioned herself near the window with her back to the light, a defensive posture that suggested someone who feared close scrutiny of her expressions. The detective's attention was drawn to a sudden movement by the fireplace, where Charles Pemberton had tossed a small object into the flames with careless haste. Poirot's hand moved with surprising swiftness, retrieving the warped metal tray with its telltale residue before the fire could complete its destruction. The object was unmistakably the pan of a handheld flash apparatus, its charred surface bearing the distinctive marks of recent use. Under Poirot's gentle but persistent questioning, Pemberton's boyish facade cracked like thin ice over deep water. His confession tumbled forth in frightened fragments. He had carried the velvet drape to the boot room at a lady's whispered request, believing her explanation that a clumsy servant had mislaid it. The flash pan had been pressed into his hands with urgent instructions to dispose of it discreetly, a task he had attempted to complete by casting it into the fire when panic overcame his judgment. Yet even as he confessed to these actions, Pemberton maintained a stubborn loyalty that spoke of deeper entanglements than simple obedience. His gambling debts, his desperate need for social acceptance, and his fear of financial ruin had made him vulnerable to manipulation by those who understood how to exploit such weaknesses. When pressed to identify the lady who had enlisted his assistance, he fell silent, his face pale with the knowledge that exposure would bring consequences far beyond criminal prosecution. Mrs. Ashford observed these proceedings with the calculating precision that had made her fortune in business, her earlier comments about insurance underwriters and negligence now taking on more sinister implications. Her intimate knowledge of the financial arrangements, her access to the side entrance key, and her sophisticated understanding of fraud techniques painted a picture of someone whose involvement went far beyond mere speculation. Dr. Thornfield's scholarly demeanor showed increasing strain as the web of evidence tightened around her unique combination of expertise. Her knowledge of authentication processes, her familiarity with photographic techniques, and her unassailable reputation in archaeological circles made her uniquely qualified to orchestrate the sophisticated deception that had been uncovered. Yet she maintained her academic composure, understanding perhaps that silence offered her only remaining protection. From his waistcoat pocket, Poirot produced a small fragment that had survived the furnace's destructive heat, protected by heavier debris that had shielded it from complete incineration. Under magnification, it revealed itself as a corner of photographic paper bearing the distinctive watermark of a London studio supplier, its surface bearing traces of silver nitrate solution that spoke of recent documentary work. The implications struck the assembled company with devastating clarity. Someone had been photographing the forged Caravaggio, creating evidence that could either support or destroy claims about its authenticity. The systematic nature of this documentation, combined with the precise timing of the insurance arrangements, revealed a conspiracy of remarkable sophistication that reached into the highest levels of London's cultural establishment. As the morning sun climbed higher above Belmont House, casting sharp shadows through the tall windows, Poirot sensed that the final pieces of the puzzle were falling into place with the inexorable precision of a well-designed mechanism. The psychological pressure had achieved its intended effect, cracking the facades that had concealed guilt and revealing the human motivations that lay beneath the surface of respectability. "Ladies and gentlemen," Poirot announced with quiet authority, his green eyes holding the certainty of complete understanding, "we shall now proceed to the long gallery, where all will be made clear. The time has come for truth to emerge from the shadows that have concealed it, and for justice to illuminate even the darkest corners of human deception." The stage was set for the final confrontation that would expose not just the immediate perpetrator of murder, but the full scope of a conspiracy that had transformed art appreciation into deadly fraud. In the candlelit corridor where the crime had been committed, Poirot would deliver the revelation that would bring both understanding and justice to the corpse that had been discovered in those shadowed halls. The assembled company returned to the long gallery with the weight of inevitable revelation hanging over them like a gathering storm. Poirot had requested that the candelabras be relit, their flames casting the same theatrical shadows that had concealed murder less than 12 hours before. The guests arranged themselves in a semicircle before the empty easel, their faces pale in the flickering light, each one aware that the moment of truth had finally arrived. Standing at the center of this human tableau, Hercule Poirot possessed the quiet authority of a man whose little gray cells had arranged every piece of evidence into its proper place. His egg-shaped head turned slowly as he surveyed each face, his green eyes missing nothing of the subtle signs of guilt, fear, and desperate calculation that played across the assembled features. "Mes amis," he began, his accented voice carrying clearly through the hushed gallery. "We have been witnesses to a crime of remarkable sophistication, one that required not merely criminal intent, but expertise, spanning multiple disciplines and access to the highest levels of London society. What appeared to be a simple case of art theft and murder was, in fact, something far more sinister, a conspiracy to conceal fraud through violence." He moved to the precise spot where Blackwood's body had been discovered, his movements deliberate and theatrical. Mr. Reginald Blackwood was not killed because he possessed something valuable, but because he knew something dangerous. His private journal revealed the horrifying discovery that the Caravaggio he had personally authenticated was, in fact, a forgery of breathtaking skill. This knowledge threatened to destroy not only his own reputation, but the carefully constructed web of deception that had ensnared some of London's most respected citizens. Dr. Thornfield's scholarly composure showed the first signs of strain as Poirot's penetrating gaze settled upon her. Her position near the window, her defensive posture, and her careful attention to how the light fell across her face all spoke of someone who feared close scrutiny of her reactions. "The creation of such a forgery," Poirot continued with relentless logic, "required intimate knowledge of 17th-century techniques, access to period materials, and the ability to age the work convincingly. More significantly, it demanded someone whose reputation in authentication circles was beyond question, someone whose scholarly credentials could lend unassailable credibility to the deception." His demonstration with the flash powder had revealed the murder method with devastating clarity. In the moment of visual confusion created by the magnesium flare, the killer struck with deadly precision, using knowledge of human anatomy to ensure that death would be instantaneous and silent. The chemical burns on Dr. Thornfield's hand, disguised as an accident with an alcohol lamp, were in fact from handling the flash apparatus immediately after its lethal use. Mrs. Ashford maintained her businesslike composure, yet her earlier comments about insurance procedures and underwriter negligence now resonated with sinister implications. Her diamonds caught the candlelight as she tilted her head with the cool appraisal of risk that had made her fortune in the world of finance. "The insurance documentation reveals a provisional coverage schedule of elegant precision," Poirot explained, producing the papers with a flourish. The timing was masterful in its simplicity. The unveiling would establish authenticity and value, while immediate theft would convert suspicion into substantial compensation. "Mrs. Ashford, your intimate knowledge of these financial arrangements, your sophisticated understanding of fraud techniques, and your access to the resources necessary for such an elaborate scheme reveal you as the architect of this grand deception." Young Charles Pemberton shifted uncomfortably, his boyish face pale with the knowledge that his desperate need for social acceptance had made him a pawn in a deadly game whose full scope he had never comprehended. When Poirot's gentle but penetrating gaze fell upon him, his remaining defenses crumbled like sand. "She promised me a recommendation," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "My gambling debts. She said she could arrange for them to disappear if I simply helped with a few small tasks. I never imagined." His eyes flickered not to Dr. Thornfield, but to Mrs. Ashford, and in that involuntary betrayal, the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. "The systematic destruction of evidence in the furnace room," Poirot observed, indicating the charred fragments that had survived the intense heat, required intimate knowledge of the household routines and confident access to the service areas. Dr. Thornfield's archaeological experience provided the technical expertise for both the forgery and its destruction, while Mrs. Ashford's business connections supplied the financial backing and insurance arrangements that would convert worthless canvas into substantial profit. Dr. Thornfield's academic mask finally slipped, revealing the desperate calculation beneath. "You cannot prove any of this," she said with forced composure, though her hands trembled as she spoke. "Speculation and coincidence are not evidence in a court of law." "Ah, but we have more than speculation, Doctor," Poirot replied with quiet satisfaction. He produced the small fragment of photographic paper that had survived the furnace's heat. "The watermark belongs to a London supplier who maintains meticulous records. This morning, by telephone, I learned that a substantial order of this particular paper was delivered to an address registered in Mrs. Ashford's name. The photographic documentation of the forgery was necessary to support the insurance claim, was it not?" Mrs. Ashford's composure finally cracked, her businesslike facade giving way to cold fury. "Reginald was a fool," she hissed. "He could have been wealthy beyond his dreams, but his precious integrity mattered more than practical considerations. When he threatened to expose everything, he sealed his own fate." The confession hung in the air like smoke from the flickering candles, and Inspector Japp stepped forward with professional satisfaction. "Mrs. Cordelia Ashford and Dr. Evelyn Thornfield, I arrest you for the murder of Reginald Blackwood and conspiracy to commit fraud." As the handcuffs clicked into place, Poirot observed the scene with the detached interest of a man who had seen justice served countless times before. The psychological game had reached its inevitable conclusion, and the truth had emerged from the shadows with the same precision that had characterized every aspect of this most sophisticated crime. Lady Belmont, her aristocratic composure intact despite the horror that had unfolded in her home, approached the detective with quiet dignity. "Monsieur Poirot, how can we ever thank you for exposing this terrible deception?" The little Belgian detective adjusted his tie with characteristic precision and offered a small, satisfied smile. "Madame, the truth has its own rewards. The little grey cells, they do not rest until justice is served, and order is restored to a world that too often mistakes shadow for substance." As the morning sun climbed higher above Belmont House, casting away the last shadows from the long gallery, the corpse in the candlelit corridor had finally received the justice it deserved. The clatter of handcuffs echoed through the long gallery as Inspector Japp's authoritative commands brought the morning's revelations to their inevitable conclusion. Mrs. Ashford maintained her businesslike composure even in defeat, her calculating eyes already working through legal strategies and damage control with the same precision she had applied to orchestrating fraud. Dr. Thornfield's scholarly dignity crumbled more visibly, her academic mask slipping to reveal a woman whose pursuit of reputation had led her into the darkest corners of human deception. As the conspirators were escorted from Belmont House, Lady Belmont's aristocratic grace remained intact despite the profound betrayal she had witnessed. The violation of trust within her own home, the corruption of respected colleagues, and the murder committed beneath her roof had shaken her deeply, yet she faced the aftermath with the dignity that had made her one of London's most formidable hostesses. Julian Hartwell stood uncertainly in the drawing-room, his soft-soled shoes and artistic materials having made him the perfect scapegoat for a crime he had never committed. Poirot approached him with unusual warmth, extending his hand in a gesture that carried both apology and vindication. "Monsieur Hartwell," the detective said with genuine feeling, "you are cast as the shadow in their theatrical performance. Such clever deceptions cannot endure when daylight reveals the truth." The artist's relief was profound and visible, his indignation dissolving into gratitude as Lady Belmont immediately offered him a commission that would restore both his reputation and his finances. The portrait she requested would capture not triumph, but steadiness after storm, a testament to dignity maintained through adversity. Charles Pemberton, pale but steadier than he had been during the night's terrors, accepted Lady Belmont's quiet assurance that his cooperation would be remembered favorably. His gambling debts and desperate need for acceptance had made him vulnerable to manipulation, yet his fundamental decency had prevented him from understanding the true scope of the conspiracy he had unwittingly served. With the immediate drama concluded, Poirot settled into Lady Belmont's drawing room to provide the comprehensive explanation that both justice and intellectual satisfaction demanded. "The conspiracy we have uncovered," he began, his accented voice carrying the authority of complete understanding, "was a masterpiece of deception that required expertise spanning multiple disciplines and access to the highest levels of London society. The forgery itself had been Dr. Thornfield's contribution, her archaeological knowledge providing intimate familiarity with 17th century techniques, aging processes, and authentication procedures. Her scholarly reputation had lent unassailable credibility to the deception, making it virtually impossible for anyone to question the painting's authenticity without appearing to doubt her professional competence. Mrs. Ashford's role had been equally crucial, her business acumen crafting insurance arrangements that would maximize profit while minimizing scrutiny. The provisional coverage schedule had been elegant in its precision. The unveiling would establish authenticity and value, while immediate theft would convert suspicion into substantial compensation. Her international connections would have facilitated the private sale of what the world believed had been stolen, creating profit from both the false insurance claim and the clandestine market. The beauty of their plan, Poirot explained with professional admiration for its sophistication, lay in its apparent simplicity. A respected dealer authenticates a valuable work, which is then stolen during a public gathering with multiple witnesses. The insurance company pays without question, and the conspirators profit twice from the same deception. The systematic destruction of evidence in the furnace room had been necessary to eliminate any possibility of expert examination that might reveal the forgery's true nature. The conspirators had needed only to maintain the fiction long enough for the insurance settlement to be completed, after which the destroyed canvas could never betray their secret. Mr. Blackwood's murder had become inevitable once his integrity led him to discover the deception. His private journal revealed a man tormented by the knowledge that his reputation had been built upon a lie, yet determined to expose the truth regardless of personal cost. The flash powder technique had allowed his killer to strike with deadly precision in the moment of visual confusion, using knowledge of human anatomy to ensure death would be instantaneous and silent. As the afternoon light began to fade through the tall windows of Belmont House, Poirot prepared to take his leave of a household forever changed by the night's revelations. Lady Belmont accompanied him to the entrance hall, her gratitude evident despite her aristocratic reserve. "Monsieur Poirot," she said with quiet dignity, "your methods may be unconventional, but your results speak with undeniable authority. How can we adequately express our gratitude for exposing this terrible deception?" The little Belgian detective paused on the threshold, his egg-shaped head tilting thoughtfully as he considered her question. "Madame, the satisfaction of seeing justice served and truth revealed is reward enough for any honest investigator. The little grey cells require only the opportunity to work. The rest follows with the inevitability of mathematical proof." He turned for one final look at the long gallery, now restored to honest daylight with its candelabras cold and its shadows ordinary once more. "Permit me one observation," he said softly. "In art as in life, glamour serves the lie, while truth prefers the steady flame and the frame correctly hung. Do not allow this ugliness to teach you suspicion of beauty, but demand of beauty that it be honest." As his motor car pulled away from Belmont House into the gathering London twilight, Hercule Poirot reflected on the case with quiet satisfaction. The corpse in the candle-lit corridor had received justice, the elaborate conspiracy had been exposed, and order had been restored to a world temporarily disrupted by human greed and deception. The evening shadows stretched across Mayfair as the small, immaculate figure carried with him the calm assurance that no deception, however sophisticated, could long withstand the patient application of logic and human understanding. Somewhere in the great city, other mysteries waited to challenge the little grey cells, but for now, truth had triumphed over deception, and justice had prevailed over the endless creativity of criminal minds. The affair at Belmont House would be remembered not merely as a case of art fraud and murder, but as a testament to the enduring principle that even in candlelit corridors, where shadows dance with deadly intent, methodical investigation and psychological insight would always find the light,